The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org Radio with the weekly edition of Global Alert News for the week of April 30th, 2016. This show is broadcast Saturday mornings on KQMS throughout Northern California. For the internet listeners that don't realize that, the show is also posted at GeoEngineeringWatch.org under the radio section for those who can't listen to the morning broadcast. My gratitude to KQMS again for allowing this show. This show is commercial free. We have no sponsors, so we can say what we want. We're not beholden to advertisers, period. And for many of the so-called independent news programs, how true is that? How many advertise? How many have sponsors? How many are obliged to keep those sponsors happy? We don't have those obligations here. Another week of planet Earth under siege, literally under siege from countless directions, no more so than from the sky above us. Keep looking up. What's happening above your heads is an immense threat to all of us. I'll get to other headlines in a moment. I want to announce again, while we have elections going on, congressional candidate Jeffrey Gerlach. You can find Jeffrey at jeffreygerlachforcongress.com. Jeffrey's running to take Doug LaMalfa's spot for U.S. Congressman. That would be a great change. Not that any congressman will be able to stop the cancer that controls this country. Not at all. No delusions in that regard. But if we have a congressman that's willing to speak out about the single greatest and most immediate threat we face at this time, global climate engineering, the greatest threat we face short of nuclear cataclysm, wouldn't it be better to have a congressman that would speak out about that? Because Doug LaMalfa is certainly not going to do it. In fact, those who want to see can search online, confronting a congressman with my name. Search Dane Wigington, confronting a congressman, and you'll find a short video of me passing on California EPA testing data to Congressman Doug LaMalfa and his staff about the heavy metal contamination that's raining down on all of us. And his staff and Mr. LaMalfa has chosen to completely ignore that data, as they've chosen to ignore about 70 other tests taken at the state-certified labs, some by U.S. Forest Service biologists, former biologists, and fish and game biologists. They simply ignore it because that's what they're told to do, and they're all too happy to do it, it seems. So if you wonder why our agencies, our elected officials, aren't telling us about such a grave threat, there's one of the reasons why, right there. A couple other quick announcements, and we'll get to some other headlines. Library event today at the Reading Library that will have representatives from Orchard Nutrition present to help teach you how to stay healthy in a world that isn't. We are swimming in a toxic soup from countless directions. Again, from the sky is an immense amount of toxic heavy metals raining down on us. That's the fallout from the ongoing global climate engineering programs, sprayed aerosols from aircraft, solar radiation management, programs that were initiated without our knowledge, without our consent. We're all part of a grand and lethal experiment. If you want to know how to stay healthy through this onslaught as much as you can, again, Reading Library, 2 to 4 p.m. today, free event. Earth Day update. Had Earth Day last weekend at the Reading Civic Center. It's the Watershed Festival, but this is an Earth Day event. GeoEngineeringWatch.org had a booth at this event, and we gave away a significant amount of free materials, DVDs, flyers. But it's always astounding to me that those who claim to be environmentally conscious don't want to face the greatest environmental threat of all. Isn't that perplexing? And if I use the term environmentalists in a fashion that's not acceptable to some environmentalists, I'm sorry, but that's how it is. There's been no greater disappointment for me than the environmental community. And I am an environmentalist to the gills. No environment, no people. That's simple, isn't it? But if you claim to care about the environment and you turn two blind eyes to the greatest environmental assault of all, again, back to the global climate engineering onslaught. Climate is the Earth's life support systems, period. And when you have willful programs to try to control and manipulate those systems in an attempt to have power over populations, to use these weapons of weather manipulations as weapons of war, the toxic fallout from these programs, which, again, is not speculation, it's not conjecture, it's not theory. We have lab tests from around the globe to prove these toxic heavy metals are raining down on us. So how can environmentalists or self-proclaimed environmentalists ignore such a threat? Truly astounding to me. And I'm not singling out all environmentally minded people. I know there are many who are willing to face this issue. But some of the self-proclaimed most dedicated environmentalists, environmental groups like Sierra Club, Greenpeace, and so forth, are completely ignoring this greatest of all environmental threats. Figure that one out. I hope they wake up, and I hope they shed their hypocrisy, and I hope they face the most dire issue of all. Not to do so is simply unacceptable. Article last week from actor, celebrity Chuck Norris called Sky Criminals. Encourage anyone to search that online. Chuck Norris has again shown tremendous courage to speak out about the ongoing climate engineering assault. Mr. Norris previously wrote an article called Why Are Geoengineering Researchers Being Stonewalled? Encourage anyone to search that article as well. And my gratitude to Mr. Norris for citing GeoEngineeringWatch.org as his primary source of data in this article. And I realize some sites that have reposted this article have deleted that portion because it seems they're not so interested in credible data as they are getting views on their own site. And that's not what this battle should be about. It should be about leading people to credible, verifiable data. So again, my gratitude to Mr. Norris for citing GeoEngineeringWatch.org as his primary source of data in that article. Search that, Sky Crimes by Chuck Norris. A quote from a philosopher, Plato, which I'm sure all have heard that name, that applies to the current state of affairs we find ourselves in. Plato stated this, quote, human behavior flows from three main sources, desire, emotion, and knowledge. And I would ask, which of these three forces is dictating your behavior and your conclusions? It's imperative that we understand we're all looking at the world through a colored lens, and we have to clear that lens if we're going to see reality for what it is. And you have all the great traditions that really have parallel wisdom in them, from biblical texts to Asian philosophies. One of the primary Asian philosophic premises is this: the three poisons, desire, aversion, and illusion, are all to be avoided. This is parallel with what Plato had just stated, because how many people do you know that are they desire something, they desire material gain and wealth, they're trying to move toward that, or they're averse to something, they're adverse certainly to reality and to truth, to unpleasant truths especially. An illusion, how many people are not seeing the world again through a clear lens? All the great traditions contain this type of wisdom. And if we're going to make a difference in the world, we need to contemplate this, change, again, the lens through which we see the world. Here's a headline from last week on a post on GeoEngineeringWatch.org. This is an article that I drafted, but the title is The U.S. Military's Willful Slaughter of Life in the Pacific Ocean. Now, can I back that up? Here's some facts and figures. And these numbers I'm about to give are taken from the Northwest Training and Testing Environmental Impact Statement from the U.S. Navy. These are their figures for just the waters from Northern California to Southeast Alaska, including Puget Sound and other inlet waters. Now, these are the take numbers. These are the amount of marine mammals expected to be harmed from U.S. military training exercises off our west coast. Consider this. Whales, toothed and baleen, 18,921. Dolphins and porpoises, 843,465. Seals and sea lions, 364,538. Think about that. Total marine mammals, 1,226,924. These figures come straight from the Navy's environmental impact statement to disclose their take. In other words, the animals they expect to harm from their training exercises. How can this be acceptable? When we still have people denying that any of this is going on, waving their flags, pretending that our military can do no wrong. And they're slaughtering, absolutely slaughtering what's left of the marine mammals off the U.S. North American West Coast. I encourage anybody to search that article, again, under the recent column of GeoEngineeringWatch.org. Now, I want to go into a bit more of a rant here, forgive me. That was the first rant that I just went into, but here's a point to consider. It's not just an insane power structure that's to blame for the unfolding nightmare that we'll all soon face. It is largely complacent populations that don't know what's going on and don't want to know. The wake-up will yet come. Understand that. There's no avoiding it. As those in power can no longer hide what's unfolding and perhaps then play the World War III card as their last option. And let's not forget that every single one of our homes has been GPS located in the 2010 census. Let's not forget that the government is setting up drone bases across the country as fast as they can. And let's not forget the 2.4 billion rounds of 40 caliber hollow point ammunition that's been purchased by the so-called Homeland Security Agency and other agencies. Let's hope that our brothers and sisters in the U.S. military wake up and realize what they're being used for. Paid mercenaries for those in power. And those in power have no more regard for the U.S. population than they do the marine mammals, which they are willfully slaughtering for training purposes. Again, taken right from the Navy's environmental impact study. A little more in this rant, forgive me. Why are Americans so completely in the dark on so many dire issues? Because they're feeding from the corporate media disinformation trough. Fox, MSNBC, CNN, Glenn Beck. And on Glenn Beck, and for those who worship Glenn Beck, why is Glenn Beck wearing a Nazi uniform on some of his shows, by the way? What's up with that? For those who think that Beck is some pillar of independent information, think again. He's nothing more than a mass marketing profiteer that's also controlled opposition. And for those on the other side of the fence that have convinced themselves that progressive icon Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! Is any different, you also need to reconsider your perception of reality. Goodman, like Glenn Beck, is controlled opposition. How are these so-called independent news sources from both extremes of right and left controlled? The same way that most of the planet and the population is controlled. Follow the money. In the case of Amy Goodman, unlike Glenn Beck, who openly sells products, again, he's a mass marketing specialist, it seems, Amy Goodman receives funding from the Ford Foundation. And I've been told by one of her staff, whom I know, that she's told what she can and can't talk about. The truth about 9/11 and the global climate modification assaults are off limits for Amy Goodman. I've met Amy twice. Not a nice person. Sorry to say that, but that was the fact of the matter. And what's Amy's opinion about her censorship of the news? She feels this. She feels justified that at least she's getting many news issues out, many stories. So what does all this come down to? It comes down to half-truths. Same is true with Glenn Beck, again. There's no difference between these two, from both extreme sides of the fence. Half-truth is not a truth. There's only the whole truth. If we don't have the whole truth, we have a lie by omission. A ship doesn't float if it's mostly watertight. And would any of us want to take a long voyage on a mostly watertight ship? I think not. The larger problem is this. The vast majority don't want anything more than a half-truth at best. The vast majority want someone to convince them that everything's always okay. They want to be convinced that someone, somewhere, is watching over everything. Such individuals are prone to lashing out at anyone who dares to disturb their comfort zone of denial. People who ridicule and criticize those who try to deliver a message of reality are typically very fearful people. They feel that if they can somehow convince you that the truth isn't really so, that perhaps they can abate their own fears. Those in power know this aspect of human behavior all too well. Thus, the government and public protection agencies are truthfully tasked with pacifying populations by hiding, omitting, flat out denying public threats. And how about this recent glaring lie from Obama that glaringly highlights everything I just outlined? Obama said this, and I'm quoting now, "We are living in the most peaceful, productive, and prosperous era in human history." Really? What planet and what reality is Obama speaking about here? Certainly not this one. This is complete fallacy. But it's what the American population wants to hear as a whole. They don't want the truth. Now, let's consider again Obama, that was given the Nobel Peace Prize while ramping up drone attacks on innocent civilians. And if you think that our government would treat the U.S. population any differently than they treat the marine mammals, which I outlined earlier, or citizens from other countries, think again. This is the Obama that prosecuted more whistleblowers or truth tellers than any other or all other presidential administrations combined. All other administrations combined. So I would ask this: where do you get your news and information from? What individuals or organizations have given you your opinion? Is it actually yours? Or did you acquire it from some other source, as opposed to actually researching it yourself? Have your opinions come from honest, objective investigation, again, a research, or ideological groupthink, herd mentality, and in general, wishful thinking? Before I go on to a list of dire global headlines, the bottom line is this. As I've said so many times in the past, there's no shortage of denial to go around on any side of the fence. Environmental and science communities correctly recognize that the planet is warming rapidly due to anthropogenic activity, human activity. The human race has indeed decimated our once thriving planet. There's no denying that. Anybody who denies that is not living in reality. But where the cognitive dissonance takes over with many in the environmental and science communities is on the unimaginably dire and rationally undeniable issue of global climate engineering. How can anyone with functional eyes and even the slightest sense of deductive reasoning not recognize what's going on in our skies? Again, the denial, Stockholm Syndrome, cognitive dissonance, the notion that my government wouldn't do anything like that to their own people or to themselves. If you believe that last statement, recheck your reality. How many examples do we have of those in power, quote, doing something horrible to themselves? They're the ones responsible for the 2,000 nuclear detonations. They're the ones responsible for the nuclear power plants, any one of which may kill us all. Fukushima, again, if it continues on this course, may kill us all if other factors don't first. And they're building 60 more of these plants right now. So, again, if you think that those in power wouldn't do this to themselves in their quest to retain their full power and control, think again. On the other side of the fence, in the ranks of those who fully acknowledge the ongoing climate engineering assault, again, no shortage of total denial. If you're one of those that's chosen to believe that global warming stopped 20 years ago, or that the planet's actually cooling and we're entering an ice age, or that everything related to the climate is just the result of a, quote, natural cycle, again, in spite of the fact that the human race has inflicted every imaginable form of unnatural complete decimation to the planet and the climate system. But if you choose to ignore all that and choose to believe that this is something natural or that the planet's cooling, and by the way, in the anthropogenic damage to the planet, let's put climate engineering at the top of that list. But again, if you believe any of what I just outlined, then you are also buried deeply in denial. For both sides of the issues mentioned, if you have chosen to believe obvious falsehoods, again, like global warming is a hoax, or that on the other side of the fence, climate engineering and chemtrails are a hoax, because you saw a headline that convinced you, or because your peers think so, or because a paid disinformation source or special interest group says so, you're in denial. Both of these factors are undeniable. Climate engineering is going on and the planet's in total meltdown. And it's important to understand the truth, and this is the bottom line. Why is it important to understand that the planet is warming rapidly and that climate engineering is going on? Both of these factors, for obvious reasons, we should acknowledge these truths. But why is it so important on both of these issues? Because the reality of the unimaginably destructive global climate engineering weather warfare, which is going on, which also must be considered biological warfare, is that if we don't recognize that the planet is warming and climate engineering is making it far worse, not better, if we don't recognize these truths, if we don't stand on the solid platform of verifiable data and thus verifiable conclusions, then we're part of the problem. We're part of the climate science and environmentalist community who denies this geoengineering elephant in the room, or part of those who recognize climate engineering is going on but somehow deny that the planet's in total meltdown because they hate Al Gore so much that they feel they have to take the opposite position of anything Al Gore ever said. That's not rational. Not at all. And the fact that Al Gore is a criminal and that carbon credits are a sham don't change the fact that the planet's in total meltdown. And again, for those that make the argument, and some continue to make this argument and many continue to believe it, that we can't know if the planet's warming or cooling until the climate science community acknowledges climate engineering, that's simply a ridiculous line of thought. If you have a body in the street that's clearly dead, you can't take the position that you don't know it's dead unless you know all the sources of damage to that body that killed it. That's not a legitimate argument. The planet's warming, period. Many, many causes behind that warming. So if you try to separate out one cause, as the environmentalists try to separate all forms of anthropogenic except climate engineering, that's wrong. Climate engineering is a major factor making the warming worse. If you're on the other side of the fence and you choose to believe that no form of human activity has harmed the planet except climate engineering, you're just as wrong. Shed the denial. Both sides of the fence need to shed their denial. Now, let's get on to some headlines along the same theme. Here's a headline from last week. We already know 2016 will be the warmest year on record, and it's only April. Excerpt from that report. It's now abundantly clear when it comes to global warming, 2016 is in a class by itself. On Tuesday, scientists at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration confirmed that March 2016 was not only the warmest March in recorded climate history, it was also the most unusually warm month of any month ever measured, breaking the record set the month prior, February. March was the 11th consecutive month. Think about this. March was the 11th consecutive month of new record global monthly temperature, the longest streak since NOAA records began in 1880. A horrendous feat, period. Finishing from this report, we've now had some 370 consecutive months of above average global temperatures, 30 years in a row. And here's a final reminder. It's not rational to deny the global climate engineering reality, given the mountain of data to confirm this reality, as we've stated, and it's also not rational to deny the unfolding planetary meltdown for the exact same reason. Why is understanding, again, I want to reiterate this point, why is understanding both points so important? Because climate engineering is making an already extremely dire planetary warming far worse, not better, and poisoning the entire planet in the process. And again, none of us like NOAA, NASA, all these governmental agencies who we know are helping to hide climate engineering. But you don't need to believe NOAA. You don't need to believe NASA. You don't need to believe our government. Look at the frontline data. You don't need to believe me. I've asked everyone, don't believe me. Please verify everything I state. Look at the frontline film footage we have of the cryosphere, the ice deposits around the globe disappearing. Frontline footage of forests burning down around the globe at astounding rates, hundreds of percentile points higher than the 30-year norm. and look at temperatures, because what we are seeing is an under-reporting of official high temperatures, not an over-reporting as many people would like to believe, because it feels good to believe there's nothing wrong with the planet. An under-reporting, radical under-reporting of temperatures, which means as dire as these reports are that I just read, the real situation on the ground is far worse, not better. Now, how do the geoengineers hide this? Here's what's happening, what just happened in Denver. Again, another engineered snowstorm, over and over and over. Every week it sounds like I'm giving the same report. Engineered snowstorm in one place, record high temperatures in another. So think about this. Denver, that's gone from 80 to snow to 80, back to snow. We're having snow there again right now, with moisture straight out of the Gulf of Mexico, by the way. Since when did that ever happen in the past? And we have, at the same time, record highs pushing 90 degrees in the southeast. Is that normal? Of course it's not normal. People need to wake up and understand these snowstorms are being chemically ice nucleated, period. We have the patents for them. The Chinese government admitted they were chemically nucleating. Why are they doing this? Because it creates the headlines they need to keep much of the American population in total denial for all the reasons I already cited. People who want to find some headline somewhere to fortify their denial so that they don't have to face the truth. So no matter how hot it is around the globe, if Denver is snowing in late April, they can convince themselves, because they hate Al Gore, that global warming is a hoax. So again, if that's the mindset that you're in, if that's your conclusions, please do some real research. Look through a clear lens. Now, also in Europe, another report, quote, parts of Europe are under the grip of winter as temperatures are colder than Siberia. Another example in Europe, just like I gave in the U.S. It's colder in Europe than Siberia. Just like December 25th, 2015, when it was 20 below in some parts of the U.S. due to chemical ice nucleating programs that cool a very dense layer of air on the surface. It was 40 degrees and raining at the North Pole, December 25th. You think that's normal? Look at the data. Now, again, moving on to what's happening on the planet as a whole, I want to get to some headlines before time runs out. Understand that while the geoengineers are doing their best to hide the total planetary implosion and meltdown, that meltdown and implosion is continuing all the same. I want to go through some headlines. I'll go through rather quickly and try to link this all together. Quote, study, oxygen drain apparent in oceans. Our oceans are dying. Many, many reasons for this. Too many people want to think dichotomously. It's just Fukushima, or it's just global warming, or it's just climate engineering, or it's all the above. It's all the above. You can't. Don't think in terms of this or that. Think in terms of this, that, and many other things. But the oceans are dying. They're stratifying. They're moving toward what's called Canfield Ocean, the stratified, oxygenless, dead, lifeless seas. That's where we're headed. U.S. Navy, as I already outlined, also a great contributor to what's happening in our seas. Another headline, why a collapse is unavoidable. We're talking about economic collapse in this headline. As I've stated in so many shows, as the environment collapses, the facade of a perpetually growing economy will also collapse. It's happening now. There's no hiding it for much longer. How long till the power structure plays the World War III card? We'll find out. Another headline, the mirage of a return to manufacturing greatness. Mirage. That's the key word in that headline. Illusion, just like the economy, is a total illusion. And the illusion is becoming almost impossible to maintain. Keep that in mind. Another headline, economy in decline. Apple reports massive revenue decline as iPhone sales plummet dramatically. Something they don't tell you on some of the mainstream media stations is they artificially pump the stock market up to keep everybody comfortable as long as they can. Keep everybody in denial as long as they can. The pumping up of the stock market is no different than the engineering of the snowstorm in Colorado or other places in Europe to try to give people some fuel for their delusion, to keep them in a position where they are not seeing reality for as long as possible. Another headline, what global growth rebound? Question mark. Ports quiet, container ships losing steam. Global shipping screeching to a halt. Keep that in mind. The BDI, Baltic Dry Index, most untarnished economic indicator of all, is absolutely hovering at record lows. If it's not shipping, it's not happening. The illusion of an expanding economy is simply an illusion. Another headline, South Korean economy struggles under weight of a triple curse. Again, you have climate conditions related to the damage done to the climate, effects, which is a lot to do with climate engineering, affecting food production. Their economic engine is screeching to a halt. You have countries around the globe that are facing what can only be considered converging catastrophes. Another headline, to see the real story in Brazil, look at who's being installed as president and finance chiefs. Same thing the U.S. has done all over the globe for decades. They topple countries, period. They install puppet dictators, period, as they've done in so many countries. This is historical fact. So they're trying to break down the BRIC countries right now because, again, the walls are closing in on those in power as well. That's why they're desperate. That's why they're invading countries for resources. They're trying to stomp out anyone who tries to disconnect from the dollar, as they've done to Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, and others. Desperate power structure. Another headline, Puerto Rico economy worsens with crisis. Most anywhere you look, Puerto Rico is crashing, period, as are many other countries. And the central banks are printing money around the globe to try to artificially inflate what's left of the quote-unquote perpetually expanding economies. Another headline, oil crash creates glut of petroleum engineers. More layoffs coming. This is the industrial machine screeching to a halt. It's going to continue. It's going to accelerate. Another headline, the $2 trillion gamble that Saudi Arabia cannot win. Saudi Arabia, with all their oil, not doing so well anymore, are they? And let's look a little bit deeper into that situation with another headline that relates to that headline I just read. $500 billion in lost oil revenues force Gulf nations to turn to debt markets. They're going into debt. The countries with the oil that have built these incredibly unsustainable scenarios like Dubai, massive city built on sand that had no real resource basis to support it other than oil. The reckoning is now here. Now, a third headline that ties into the two I just read. 50% of proved oil reserves may have just vanished. Why is that? Because all the stated oil reserves were completely overstated. This gives OPEC members status in that organization, so they all have radically overstated their reserves. This is, again, the delusion of the industrialized, militarized, perpetually expanding economy that's built on the notion that you can continue to loot, plunder, and pillage the planet and rely on oil reserves that aren't there because they've been overstated. Another headline, the government is crushing the piggy bank, quote, Norway boosts withdrawals from its sovereign wealth fund. Again, another example of another country that's sinking rapidly, exhausting all their resources. Another headline, we haven't seen this in our lifetimes, quote. CEO says about Alberta. Alberta is in a depression. All over the globe, it's happening. So in the U.S., more than any other country, there's a massive effort to hide what's unfolding around us with the political theater that we're all exposed to. More on that in a moment. Another headline, time bomb ticking in the global bond market. 17 trillion of governments yield less than 1%. Duration risk soaring. This is, again, a massive red flag of the completely artificial economy that so many are invested in, if you will, and the derivatives market. And derivatives, for those who don't know what they are, it's basically a massive gambling casino with no basis to it. And so much of the quote-unquote wealth in our country is based on the derivative market, which is nothing, literally nothing. Nothing to back it up. It's collapsing. Another headline, New York Times layoffs loom. New York Times to shutter Paris facilities and latest blow to European newspaper business. One more example of collapse unfolding, and especially with the news organizations that are paid to do the bidding of the power structure anyway, the corporate media. So thankfully, some of the population is disconnecting from those sources of media. Another headline, no energy recovery in sight. Freeport Energy fires 25% of its oil and gas workers. Again, more signs of the collapsing energy industry as industrialized civilization comes to a halt. Another headline, don't fly planes with Wi-Fi, says EMF health advocate. Now, how obvious is that? We're an electrical organism. Our bodies are electrical in nature. And life is electrical. How clear could it be that being exposed to radical radio frequency signals is not good for us at all? So should it be a surprise that a health advocate states that to fly in a plane with Wi-Fi is not good for you? That should be clearly obvious. We're all like walking antennas. We're sucking up toxic, electrically conductive heavy metals with every breath we take, making us even more susceptible to these signals. And we're being bombarded with these signals. And all these cell towers that we see going up are clearly not just being used for cell phone repeating, because there's 10 times more power being pumped into the NextRad towers than they need for cell phone repeaters. And if they're not being used for weather modification, then why do we see their signature on precipitation maps? These towers with their radio frequency signals are part of a grid that's used to expand and broadcast these electrically conductive particles throughout the atmosphere. When they're exposed to radio frequencies, it causes them to repel each other in every direction. It helps the solar radiation management programs to better disperse the particles they're spraying in the atmosphere. And we're all being exposed to these signals. Should be no surprise, it's hugely harmful to us. Another headline, for the first time, U.S. deploys 2 F-22 Raptors close to Russia to, quote, deter aggression. Now, I'm not a fan of Putin. I'm not a fan of any global government. They're all crooked. But they're corrupt in direct proportion to their size. Who's the most powerful country in the world? That question should answer itself. So I would ask this, how would the U.S. feel if Russia deployed some MiG fighters out of Tijuana? How would we feel? Or perhaps Cuba or Canada. So Americans are very hypocritical in their views. They think it's okay for NATO and the U.S. to completely surround Russia, putting missile bases and airports with fighter planes right on their borders. Americans would never tolerate that. So how about we dump the hypocrisy and understand that our government is doing everything they can to provoke anyone who doesn't agree with them. Another headline. Now listen to this one carefully. We are not the good guys, quote. American drone warfare is terrorizing the Middle East. Again, this fits with the earlier headline about the Russian fighters. How would we feel if Russian drones were flying over our airspace, randomly bombing people? And let's not forget, we have incidents like wedding parties of 50 innocent civilians bombed by Obama, who won the Nobel Peace Prize. Where is reason in this equation? And the hypocrisy of the American public and their unwillingness to find out what's really being done in their name, and our military brothers and sisters who need to stop participating in the insanity. You need to wake up. That's why we're trying to get news out to you. And now, for those who think that Bernie Sanders is a savior, that Bernie Sanders is a voice of peace and reason, how about this headline? Bernie Sanders says U.S., quote, kill list is legal and backs troops in Syria. Here's Syria, a sovereign nation that our country has helped to topple like so many other nations. And here's Bernie Sanders being touted as if he's going to come in and save the day. There's a headline for you. He's backing exactly what Obama's doing. There's no difference in these people. I state that over and over. It's all a grand facade and they're all part of it. Think about it. Another headline, crude tankers bound for China's surge amid stockpiling signals. They're preparing. Make no mistake, countries around the globe, governments around the globe are preparing for what's coming. They're trying to stockpile energy as rapidly as they can. 2 final headlines. How the CIA writes history. Keep that in mind. History is written by the victor. And we have not been given much truth overall. Through history classes and so forth, history is always written by the victor. So we have history written the way our government chooses to write it in so many cases. And along those lines, final headline, 9/11 Commission didn't clear Saudis. This is a new headline from The Guardian. Now, keep in mind, for those who think that the 9/11 investigation was legitimate, it was anything but. It was nothing but a cover-up. And think about this. In the whole 9/11 Commission report, not a single sentence to address, the third building that fell down. As if they didn't know a third building fell down. They didn't even address the issue. Why? Because there is no rational explaining away that a 47-story steel structure high-rise can collapse from furniture burning in the first floor. And on the Saudis, ask yourself why our government would give a free plane ride to 93 Saudis back home, no interrogations whatsoever. And now that's being admitted to. Let's hope that some more truth comes out on the whole 9/11 false flag debacle. Now, I'm sorry, I apologize. There's one final headline here. From The Guardian, again, world heading for catastrophe over natural disasters, risk expert warns. From this report, with cascading crises where one event triggers another set to rise, international disaster risk reduction efforts are woefully underfunded. Final statement from this report, the world's failure to prepare for natural disasters will have, quote, inconceivably bad consequences as climate change fuels a huge increase in catastrophic droughts, floods, and humanitarian crises. Now, what's missing from this report? Climate engineering. Because they can't talk about that. It's not allowed. And in regards to droughts, by the way, and I'm not denying that the climate is disintegrating and that there are many causes. There certainly are, as I've already acknowledged in this report. But in regards to drought overall, globally, that can almost exclusively be attributed to climate engineering, because the aerosol particles dry out the atmosphere, period. They disrupt the hydrological cycle. So here we have, again, media, academia, all in total denial of the climate engineering elephant in the room that's wreaking havoc on the planet, human health, and the web of life. Now, to continue with a bit of a rant, why are so many compelled to turn two blind eyes to all that's unfolding around us? Why are so many, especially in industrialized countries, willing to go along with the insanity? It's not only those directly involved with the insanity, as I've stated over and over, or those that are directly employed by the military industrial companies and corporations who are helping to create, or the military itself, but also the countless working class members of society whose pensions are heavily invested in the very companies that exist to create the insanity, because chaos and destruction are simply good for business for those companies involved with the defense industry. They're good for their bottom line, at least until the biosphere completely implodes and the planet no longer supports life. And we're talking about companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop, Motorola, Grumman, Bell Helicopter, Standard Missile Company, Rockwell, Texas Instruments, Horizon, General Electric, Ball Corporation, Benelli, Battelle, Bechtel Power, a company that I once worked for 3 decades ago, Kellogg, Brown & Root, Halliburton, the list goes on and on. In fact, you would be shocked if you search top 100 defense companies, you'll see what most Americans are invested in one form or another. So is it any wonder that they don't want to take a stand against this? They simply want to ride the ship to the bottom of the sea, pretending everything will be fine? It won't be. Wake up. Do your part. Now, let's look into the world of academia again. Those people around us that feel they're doing some peaceful and productive participation in society, and they belong to organizations like this, the Aerosol Society. Now, this is an organization of academicians who are tasked with monitoring the aerosols being sprayed on us from jet aircraft and from other sources. Here's a few statements from their mission page. The Aerosol Society was formed to provide a forum for the discussion of different aspects of aerosol research. And again, aerosol is a finely suspended particulate in the atmosphere, exactly what's being sprayed from the jet aircraft above us as part of the solar radiation management / geoengineering / weather warfare programs. Second sentence from their mission statement. The Society has a written constitution in which its structure and aims are laid down. Briefly, the Society aims to, number 1, promote all scientific branches of aerosol research. 2, promote by means of meeting and publications the spread of information and interdisciplinary basis to make available a pool of expert knowledge. 3, encourage international cooperation. 4, recruit new members and assist in training. Now, let's think about this for just a moment. Here we have societies of academicians, scientists, who are doing their part to report to the military-industrial complex exactly what the sprayed aerosols are doing to the planet and to us. And they think that their job is okay. It's okay to just do their job. And when they mention interdisciplinary basis, it's basically discussing working in bubbles so that everyone is isolated and not realizing the full picture of what they're involved with. Military always does this, compartmentalization. So the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and all are part of the cancer that's destroying the planet and all life on it. So again, for those order followers who are part of societies like this, look in the mirror, look your children in the eyes, understand what you're a part of. For our military brothers and sisters, understand what you're a part of. It's not okay to blindly wave a flag and pretend you're doing the right thing. That's not okay. That's not the oath that you took. The oath you took was to protect the Constitution and your citizens from all threats, foreign and domestic. It's your obligation. It's not just an option. We are farther into a dark corner than most people understand. And this needs to be realized while there's still something left to salvage. Now, in the last week alone, we have local media, for example, like our KRCR or the Record Searchlight, and media all over the country for that matter, that denies the climate engineering issue, the geoengineering issue, and compares it with subjects like Bigfoot or swamp monsters or flying saucers. This is how ridiculous the world is that we live in. When we have studies day after day coming from science institutions all over the globe about climate engineering. And I want to read a couple of those studies from only the last few days. And these studies can be found, again, online for anyone who bothers to search. Just to give an example of the legitimacy of this issue. In fact, here we have one company soliciting for employment, a job offer, no deadline. Quote, the Forum for Climate Engineering Assessment within the School of International Service, American University. We seek a part-time programmer assistant to join the team working on a new funded project for climate engineering. Soliciting for jobs for something that apparently, according to our media, doesn't even exist, right? Here's another. India Climate Dialogue, Risky Geoengineering, a Climate Panacea, ? Countries around the globe, academicians around the globe are now starting to question what's going on. Now, in this study, we have a further statement that says geoengineering may have to move from the fringes of the climate debate towards mainstream in the world to meet the climate targets included in the Paris Climate Agreement, say some policy analysts and scientists. Now, when they pretend it's not already going on, that's exactly what I alluded to earlier in the show. So many people pretending reality is not reality while the ship goes down. Another study, Marcia McNutt, very well known in the climate science community. Marcia McNutt, quote, climate intervention. This is a science study, again, just released this last week. Climate intervention, possible impacts on global security and resilience. From this report, to date, most research on countering the impacts of climate change has focused on mitigating climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions or adapting human and natural systems to make them more resilient to the effects of climate change. Recently, a committee was convened by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences to consider a third option, climate intervention, climate engineering in other words, also known as geoengineering. That's right from the report. Again, just from this last week, pretending as if this isn't already going on and hasn't been going on for 70 years, report after report after report like this, probably a dozen this week alone, and yet our media continues to pretend this issue isn't real. Doesn't that make them accomplices to the crime? They have a public responsibility, and our agency officials, our elected officials like Congressman Doug LaMalfa, our reporting agencies like water quality testing, which will be part of the lawsuit that's coming to hold the water quality testing agencies responsible for the fact that they have not disclosed a massive, verifiable, and undeniable toxic heavy metal contamination from the massive amounts of heavy metals raining down on us, accumulating in soils, waters, and us. And if you're okay with that, if you want to go on about your life pretending this isn't real, enjoy the denial while you can. And then ask yourself how you're going to feel when everything implodes around you and you know you were a part of it because you did nothing. You did nothing. Again, in the words of Edmund Burke, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Good men and women. Which side of that fence do you want to be on? And how will you face your children if you were on the wrong side of that fence? Simple question. Here's an article from a website called GeoEngineering Monitor. Again, there's so many websites to confirm what's happening in our skies. Still not admitting what's happening, but getting closer. From the website GeoEngineering Monitor, here's a headline. If mankind is forced to take drastic action to stop global violence or warming, and again, the violence is related to warming, the refugee situation is related to disintegrating climate because countries are being droughted out by climate engineering, forcing mass migrations, all of this is connected. Final statement of that headline, and I'm quoting from the headline, things are going to get ugly. They're already getting ugly, aren't they? Not for those that are still in their bubbles in America, many of them. But we have about 30 plus countries descending into chaos right now around the globe. How many Americans are even remotely aware of that? Things are disintegrating now. It's not off on the horizon. Now, from this report of the headline I just read, quote, it's hard to see how to feel good about a future in which we're forced to fundamentally alter the planet to save it from burning or drowning. But warning about that nightmare scenario might be what it takes to kick the world's leaders into high gear. That's the end of the quote from that headline. How many world leaders don't know about this? They all know. They all know. They're simply towing the line, and all these climate conferences we see are simply smoke and mirrors. Paris, Cancun, Copenhagen, smoke and mirrors to pretend that they're trying to do something for the environment when all they're doing is backdoor deals to expand climate engineering. That's the reality. And that reality will continue unless the American population and other populations around the globe wake up, learn what's going on, and do their part to change course. And in the meantime, again, we'll have organizations like the Weather Channel, sponsored by the U.S. military, their primary sponsor, the Weather Channel paid liars owned by Bain Capital and Blackstone, and sponsored by the U.S. military, putting up commercials about starving African children and abused animals. And those are two of their other main sponsors. And I'm very sensitive to the starving kids in Africa, very sensitive, and also to abused animals. And I've given to organizations on both those fronts. But I would ask this, if the whole ship is sinking, if the whole planet is going down, and we have our own U.S. military engaged in climate destruction programs that are causing so much of this suffering, why wouldn't we focus on that? Why wouldn't we focus on the bigger picture and not be confused by disinformation organizations like the Weather Channel? Final statements. All of us have a responsibility to thoroughly examine our perceptions of reality. Are our conclusions built on fact or wishful thinking and ideology? All of us have a responsibility to our children and the web of life. All of us. Giving back more than you take is not an option. It's a responsibility. How completely oblivious is modern civilization to that fact? Turning two blind eyes to reality is not a viable defense, and it certainly won't save you or anyone else. Period. Face the truth head on by taking the time to examine verifiable frontline data. Don't turn away from the ever-darkening horizon. Rather, march forward toward it, carrying a torch of truth and an honest desire to shine the light on the collective insanity that resides in the shadows currently. Help us to expose that insanity. It's up to all of us. It can't be the job of one or two. And if you're sitting on the bench thinking someone else is moving the ball up the field so you don't have to, that's a mistake. And that won't get the job done. That won't help us win the battle that we must win, or all else is lost. And the single greatest leap we could take in the right direction is to expose the single greatest threat that we face, the single greatest and most immediate threat short of nuclear cataclysm. That threat is global climate engineering, decimating the web of life, destructing the hydrological cycle, shredding the ozone layer, contaminating virtually the entire planet and every breath we take. single greatest leap we could take in the right direction is to expose these programs. Do your part. Learn what's happening. Make your voice heard in the battle for the greater good while there's yet time to make a difference. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org. Thank you.